one is from the banner, is about Kurt Schmoke, who had, prior mayor of Baltimore City, current president of University of Baltimore, and was the chair of the board of Baltimore City Community College. So wearing a few different hats there. And, previously, both in this year and in years past, he's proposed mergers of higher ed institutions in Baltimore City specifically, that he has governance oversight over. And so some of the comments certainly appreciated by this campaign from the faculty union at Baltimore City Community College was that they weren't consulted when this proposal was made. The president of Baltimore City Community College really didn't have much of a public stance on this at all. And what I find kind of interesting is when this was being discussed in 2019, there wasn't a lot of traction for it then. And if anything, the legal and higher education environment in Baltimore and in Maryland has kind of shifted away from the feasibility of the idea of proposing an associate's degree and a workforce credential oriented institution, Baltimore City Community College, and a bachelor's and graduate degree issuing institution, University of Baltimore. Also, before we move forward, I'll say that really this is not about the leadership of individual people. It's folks closer to within those institutions should be speaking out and probably have different opinions. This is more about a systemic and structural problem of the lack of input of stakeholders. So sometimes there'll be kind of a single student member who's appointed to the Board of Trustees. But in Maryland, unlike in states around the country, Nebraska, Colorado, California, where there is democratically elected governance of university boards of regents or boards of visitors or boards of trustees, sort of like there are at school boards, we don't have any semblance of democratic governance and oversight over higher education institutions in Maryland. So we can move on to the next slide. And as I mentioned, this conversation is not new. It's been going on for not just 6 years since Marvin Cheatham and I wrote an op-ed with a counter proposal, but really for the better part of a couple of decades. And so I think it's important to understand the history of community colleges and in Baltimore a little bit, and Baltimore City Community College specifically. It was relatively late in its founding in the 1960s and was originally part of the Baltimore City Schools. It later became a department of city government, and as the fiscal situation for the city declined in the 80s, it became a state institution. It's the only community college in the state which is not a locally chartered institution, but is actually a state institution. And when that happened, that transfer from city oversight, where teachers have the right to unionize, to state being a state institution, the existing faculty union was broken and disbanded at that time. So that's unions are a form of democratizing the workplace. And so that was a clear move away from faculty having a strong voice in the governance of the institution through collectively bargained agreements with the administration, to the opposite of that. And it's been reversed recently after decades of organizing. Community college faculty earned the right to collectively bargain. I was part of that advocacy and have been part of organizing at my community college. But I think it's important to point out that there's been this swerve away from democratic governance in higher education in Maryland, both in the publics like BCCC and University of Baltimore, but also in the private universities like Hopkins. There's just a story in Truth Out about when the graduate worker union went to deliver and deliver a petition and meet with their administrators. the newly founded Hopkins police kind of followed them in and surveilled them in to intimidate them, right? So we see this movement away from free speech and the right to organize without intimidation to what's actually happening on the ground, which is very, very far from that. So going back to this proposal again, what President Schmoke was proposing was merging University of Baltimore and Baltimore City Community College, and what Dr. Marvin Cheatham and I, he's an activist in West Baltimore, he and I proposed instead merging University of Baltimore into Morgan State University. So University of Baltimore would become kind of the downtown campus of Morgan State. It would have the law school, for example, and then merging Community College of Baltimore County and Baltimore City Community College. And that was, about 6 years ago. And really what I want to stress on this podcast is not whose merger proposal is better, but who has a voice in those decisions. So everyone in the public, the public square should be saying, oh, I like this idea, I like that idea, I don't like either of those ideas. But at the end of the day, stakeholders like students and faculty and staff and community members should have a voice. So that's why in the op-ed that Doc and I wrote, I've highlighted this segment that the board of the new Community College of Baltimore that we called for back then was to be made up of 2 elected Baltimore County residents, 2 elected Baltimore City residents, and 3 appointed members, 1 by the county exec, 1 by the mayor, and 1 by the governor. And that's in really stark contrast to the current process in which state senators, nominate someone and the governor affirms them. We're talking about a majority of the members of the board being elected by the community. So I think, again, that democratic through line through the proposals and stories that Andy is talking about and that I'm talking about and that we'll talk with Lawrence about is who has the decision-making power, who has a seat at the table, and when are these deals kind of being done in a back room and kind of spilling out once they've already been determined for the most part. So a few key facts here. So number of elected higher education trustees in Maryland is a big 0, right? And that doesn't have to be that way. We should be, just like we elect school board members for pre-K through 12 school districts, there's no reason why community colleges or universities should not have elected members as well. Important to stress, 1990 was the year that Baltimore City Community College is taken over by the state. The faculty union was broken as a result. And one of the issues, and this is kind of history repeating itself, or at least rhyming, is if Baltimore City Community Colleges merged into University of Baltimore, because University System of Maryland administrators had been blocking efforts by faculty and graduate workers to pass legislation in Annapolis to give them the right to collectively bargain. That would put the new founded AFT local at Baltimore City Community College in danger of being broken for a second time. So we need to really watch that closely. Whatever happens, we need to make sure that students and faculty and labor have a strong and decisive role in the outcomes. And then the last factor I wanted to highlight again, and Andy and I talked about this a year ago. So want to be really clear that BCCC and University of Baltimore are very important institutions for our city, for our state. Enrollment has been declining. And in part, that's because most of the students who go to those institutions are local students. There's not a lot of out-of-state students or even students from the other side of the state coming to these institutions. That's especially true for BCCC. And the one population that's growing in Baltimore City schools are immigrants. And we have a state funding formula for English as to speakers of other languages classes. That formula was last adjusted in the 1990s, and the cap has been raised as the immigrant population has grown, but the funding formula is still woefully inadequate and hasn't been adjusted for inflation. So when we think about what are the solutions to the enrollment issues that higher education institutions are facing, part of the answer has to be doing right for our immigrant students. And so that's why I included that last 9.3 million, which is the cap that has been raised, but the formula has not changed. So a lot of folks are more familiar with pre-K through 12 or Blueprint advocacy and funding numbers. Imagine if the per pupil formula for students in Maryland schools had not changed since the 90s. The overall pie had grown as more students entered the system, but the funding formula had not changed. That would be an outrage. People would be up in arms, but that's exactly what's happened here with this important part of community colleges and immigrant education, immigrant justice.